Welcome back to the Beyond the Batters Box podcast here at Baseball Pros. I'm your host, Nick Kemper. Today we have Terry Phillips on. Terry, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I would say this is the official podcast come up for me. I've never done an in-person interview. We got the gold microphones, which is like this is a far cry from my first podcast. I did not first. I think it was my second with Jerry D. Filippo, Challenger Strength, and it was awesome. It was a great conversation, but it also like sounded like we were talking in like the Talk Boy from Home Alone 2. So this is like I feel like I made like the big time now.
For sure.
But anyway, so my name is Terry Phillips, physical therapist. I have my own practice here inside of Baseball Pros. I've been at PT for 16 years now. I originally went to Ithaca College, graduated 2009, moved out here, Seattle. Shortly thereafter, started working at an outpatient clinic for 6-7 years. 2014, I met Kyle Bodie at a talk he was giving. He at the time was kind of talking about some pretty cool stuff that I'd never heard about. I'd never heard about really plyo balls before, and which is like absurd to say now. Yeah, and he was giving, he was kind of giving a talk on the work he did with like Herbie Good, which was like just like cool. So afterwards, I approached him. I was like, "Hey, I want to come like check out your place." He's like, "Yeah, come down at some point." Came down. This was 3 driveline facilities ago, so it was like. It was like the size of this office that we're in right now. It was tiny. Yeah. But when hung out with him for a day, afterwards I was like, hey, this is really cool stuff. I'd like to team up at some point. And fortunately, I was really the only PT that he knew. So he was like, yeah, cool, let's do it. And he goes, we're gonna be moving in a new facility at some point. They moved into. Again, 2 facilities ago, I think 2016, maybe 2015, started bringing me on a part-time capacity. So I was kind of splitting jobs, or I wasn't splitting jobs. I was doing my full-time job in an outpatient facility, going down driveline on my day off. And then, long story short, my outpatient job got bought out by a, Kmart PT. So things were kind of going sideways anyways, and I decided it was like going to be a good time to move out, and then luckily Driveline was growing. So I approached Mike, CEO, and was like, hey, I either need to, at that time I was even like, I might start my own thing at this point, or you guys could just bring me on full-time. Mike's like, okay, we'll bring you on full-time. So I was there from 2017 full-time to 2022, and had a wealth of experience in the baseball world. Got to meet some other people in this room. And then, 2022 came around. My daughter was born. I live an hour north of Driveline without traffic, and Seattle traffic is pretty brutal, as everyone has been here knows. And just I decided at that point 2 hours in the car wasn't worth it. Went back to outpatient PT for a couple of years with an old mentor of mine that was 5 minutes from my house. Did not appreciate the change in environment from going from
big leaguer to probably 7-year-old.
Yeah, well, it was like just like the stimulus of like being at Driveline like all day long. Like I would have like an hour-long drive home, obviously, and then just like I would just like need to sit in silence for an hour. I had the traffic too, so that was also stressful. Like literally, I just have days where I'm just not gonna listen to music for a full hour. And then and to my fault, my last day driving was on Friday. I started working at an outpatient facility on Monday, and there was just no like shift. And then like it took me a minute to kind of like adapt to that. But it was good. It was a great environment, great PTs to work with. Still keep in touch with everyone there. But after a couple of years, decided like I need to get back in the sporting environment. So reached out to Brent, Aaron, Steven, long story how we got to that point, but I was like, hey, I want to kind of open my own shop. Can I do it inside of here? Thankfully, they had already I'd already worked with a lot of people that would train out of here. And they're like, cool, yeah. So, the joke is like from the time that that's not a joke, but like the time that I decided I want to start my own like practice, which was like May of 2024. I opened up my own practice on August 5th of 2024. So like the turnaround was just like obscenely short. But it's been great so far. I think it's been going. Been growing. We got obviously a strength department now too, so it's been pretty fun times here.
Awesome. Do you, or I guess, were you a part of the 1 a.m. crew back at Jotline?
No,
You were a
no,
part of that?
no. I was part of a 6:30, 7 a.m. crew lifting. We would get maybe like Stefan would be there, Settles would be there. I was like pseudo like drive line as far as like staying out super late. I was thankfully because I was like an independent contractor. I was like they just kind of let me do my own thing, so I was never like there like until all hours like the majority of like a lot like workers are there.
Yeah. For reference, like back in the day when Jotline first started, it was like they would go to like 2 o'clock in the morning would be like the last hitting group, and then they'd be back at like 6 a.m. and like some of the guys just sleep at the facility. It was brutal, from what I've heard. But yeah, it sounds like you were a part of that, which is probably good for both you and your family.
Yeah, that was I probably had the best work life balance of like most of the employees there.
Yeah. I think a lot of guys are just crush ghosts, which like they have to at that point, which good for them, but yeah, definitely not for the faint of heart for sure. Talking about like why you went into physical therapy and like what led you to that from like your college baseball career, because like you had what, two labrum surgeries right in college?
Yeah, so I mean, this is every PT story. So if anyone's ever any PTs ever like told you like how they got into PT, you can just fast forward through this part because it's all the same. But I was a pitcher growing up. Played baseball growing up and then was a pitcher. Had my first labrum surgery in junior year of high school, so 2002, and then was able to still make it to JUCO baseball. This was again, I joke that these were different times where 80 miles an hour in upstate New York could still get you a JUCO job. But I was able to still I able to play at Finger Lakes Community College for a couple years. Did fine. Velocity started coming back up a little bit in my second year, but then for numerous reasons, shoulder went again, and ended up requiring a second surgery. And then at that point, 2 surgeries in 3 years, given rehab and training times at that point, it wasn't coming back from that at that point. But thankfully during this time I spent years in PT. Even like leading up to my first surgery, and I realized going into it, like kind of going to high school, like I want to do something with athletes. Because I just had such a passion for baseball and for sports in general. Even then, I really enjoyed the time in the weight room. So I was like, okay, something with sports seems cool, and I kind of pegged between athletic training and PT. Luckily, at my JUCO, they had an athletic training major, so like I was doing that as my major, doing working some games. Still made actually good contact with my supervisor there, Jeremy Termy. He's awesome. But after that time, I realized that as I was hitting some 11 or 12 o'clock times, getting out of games and having to go to 6 a.m. practice, I realized I wasn't too big into athletic training. And then also at this time, I was still going into more physical therapy for my shoulder, and I realized this is more what I want to do. So that's what I went to when I transferred to Ithaca, transferred into the PT program there, and graduated from there in 2009.
What was your PT like going through your shoulder rehab, and then how, or knowing what you know now, how different is it, or what would you change?
That's a good question. It was just, and this isn't. I mean, I still think very highly of the PTs and PTs that I worked with. It's this is just the times, but it was the kind of your standard underloading. Just a lot of banded work. It was I was doing stuff 5 times a day, that was strengthening, and it's we know I'm not strengthening shit. If I'm able to do my exercises 5 times a day, and to my credit, I was on it. I was yeah, I gotta do my band work. Yeah, I gotta do my band work. I gotta do my holds, my scapular depression work, my raise push-ups, do my sleeper stretch. So it's stuff that's still really prevalent now. It's just but it was your standard underloading, and then there just wasn't a plan to get back into like actual like true strength training, or like not that was neglected, but it's just like that was what was thought of, like, okay, we got to strengthen your scap muscles, we got to strengthen your rotator cuff muscles. That's what our focus is. We're not really gonna focus on the rest of the body. We're gonna maybe like focus on your trunk and core. But just like the concepts of like the amount of like stimulus that's needed to do that was just like, especially in PT, was just not like prevalent at that time.
And do you think like that stuff still exists today?
I think it's definitely getting better, but I think it's still pretty rampant. I definitely, granted, like I get the bias of like a selection bias of like if I see people who have tried PT, it's like they've tried PT because it hasn't worked. So I'm not seeing the athletes who are like PT worked for them, like commonly, like maybe
Right.
so it's like PT hasn't worked for them, and like a lot of times the common reason why is that they just weren't getting like the proper loading that they needed, a good actual like return back up in their sport, just missing the gap between like, okay, we can get you out of pain and you are now stronger than when you came in, uh, but there's still such a huge gap between where you're at right now and what needs to happen for sport. So I think that's still like, just especially with baseball, because it's just so unique and there's just so many variables that go into like playing injuries, that there's just such a gap between like what needs to, what happens on the PT side and like what needs to happen on the return to play side.
Yeah, I think that's a really good like talking point too, because I remember like when I went through like my first one was basically I became like medically healthy, but in terms of like being able to throw a baseball, like I still couldn't do it like anywhere close to the level that I was, and then also like anywhere close to the level that like I needed to. And I remember like my like doctor and like original PT at first was just like, yeah, like you're medically clear, like go. And I was like, what? Like this?
Sick.
Yeah, like this doesn't feel anywhere close to what I did before. Like, is this what is normal now? Like what's that expectation? And I think like a lot of guys probably aren't as fortunate to have somebody like you, or like to have somebody who's like really involved with like the actual game aspect of it and understand like this is something that is not just like the gen pop. Like throwing 95 miles an hour is not something that like the everyday person can do. And like as a result, like there needs to be some extra like I don't want to say add-ons, but like some extra steps that you take to kind of like get back to like that level of performance. And I think that is something that is still like lagging behind. Because like, how many guys do you see that like come to you and they're like, hey, like I went through like this PT and like my arm still like is not anywhere close to better.
Yeah, I still see a good amount. I don't want to like put a number on it by any means, but yeah, it's just like I said before, it's just like, okay, I've done my external rotation with like 3 pounds. I've done scapular push-ups. I've done wall slides and wall angels like till my shoulders are burning. Um, and I completed a return to throwing program, which is like, okay, I throw out to 120 feet. Why can't I throw 95 now? It's like, okay, well, there's a lot of aspects. Even I have a college dude right now, who's, again, I won't say names, but he's worked with a pretty famous surgeon, and it's just like he's 5-6 months post op, and he's just coming to my care now, and the kid hasn't lifted at all, and like he's supposed to start throwing. He is start throwing, um, and it's just like there's multiple levels of that to clean up, uh, that we can't just all do at one time. So it's a difficult balance of like, for lack of a better term, like kind of playing nice to the surgeon and not being like, oh wait, no, this has been a mess. We're not doing anything that he says to do. It's like, okay, we're still going to do that. The throwing stress, especially when I was looking at the throwing program, the throwing stress is overall going to be like pretty low. But like, how can we like quickly build you up, quickly, quote unquote, get you to the point where you need to be. So when the time comes to start throwing harder than what the beginning of the throwing program is, you're going to be ready for that.
Talk to me about weighted balls and like how those get implemented into like one a regular throwing program and then two like a return to throw. Because I remember when I was going through it, and like once again like my first PT like when I first brought out, I think I brought like the blue ball, like the blue like driveline ball.
Did he fire you from his care?
Yeah, basically he was like, "What are you doing?" And acted like I just brought the plague instead of his clinic. And I just was just like, yeah, like this is something that I thought was normal, and he acted like it was totally insane that I did that. And I think like a lot of PTs have that too, and like you still have that in the baseball community, right? Like,
Yeah.
Even you know, like there's a lot of coaches that are like, whoa, don't throw anything over 5 ounces.
Yeah. You're gonna have to keep me back on track on this answer here.
Okay.
But first foremost, like one thing that I think is pretty cool, which I honestly wasn't expecting when I started working at this facility, which Nick and I commonly joke of like we've just been so involved in like Driveline's bubble. It's like when we aren't in the baseball sphere, it's like there's some things where like what, like but one of the cool things is like a lot of my like younger athletes, like they already have like exposure to plyo balls and weighted balls, and like it's like, and parents aren't like, oh my gosh, should he doing this? So like, I think it's like at the younger levels, it's more commonly accepted in just like typical practice. I know that answer is making like a lot of like coaches, PTs, whomever's listening right now kind of cringe at that. So let me go into the answer of like where they have a place in just regular training. I look at it as it's essentially just like cross training for your body. I think Joe Padula had a pretty good post not too long ago about just like using rather, I might just make this all like not get his point across, but essentially using like constraints, using various like training modality across the spectrum to essentially when you go and do the thing, you've just had so many reference points of like moving your body in a certain way that the thing that you're trying to accomplish, which is throwing a 5-ounce baseball, now becomes a lot more fluid. And I think that's how weighted balls operate, is you're just giving your body a different reference point for plyo balls, a different feel, and you're still just trying to like accomplish a goal of throw this ball at X velocity. This isn't saying it's always like max velocity by any means. I mean, most of the time it's not. To a target and do that repetitively over time, and your body's going to become more efficient at the skill of throwing. So when you go and you try to accomplish something with a 5-ounce baseball, you again now have all this like input to your body of like, this is how I'm supposed to be moving during the skill of throwing. And I think that makes it like essentially more efficient, a more effective way of like learning new throwing movements or new mechanics, we'll say, than if like all you're doing is like 5-ounce baseball throws, like even off the mound. Like that definitely like has some component that like it needs to happen. I don't think you can only throw plyos and only throw like 11-ounce weighted baseballs and expect that's going to like definitively like be the only thing you need to do to like get better at throwing a 5-ounce baseball. But I think when you're looking at like a full like comprehensive training program, like you'll get a lot more like out of it if you're like incorporating like a wide range of like movements and modalities.
Okay.
Go ahead. I was saying, but from a training perspective, where I think if we're looking at like general population thoughts as why they get kind of like bastardized or like why they get demonized, or say, is people just see like on social media like, oh, people using weighted balls are only doing like pull downs at max effort, or they're doing plyo balls at max effort. And they think like that's just what you do with them. And again, this is where like the nuance and like the context of using them comes into play, is like there's just so much involved with like utilizing in like so many different ways that you can, that it's just like, again, it just becomes like a tool that is utilized to accomplish a task. And then with that, I think a lot of people just think like, okay, yeah, the same plyo ball program that you're going to use for Shohei is going to be the same plyo ball program that you're going to use for a 12-year-old. It's like, no, of course not. Like, there might be some coaches that actually do that, and like they're just that's on them for not actually like getting educated on the topic. But like general, like if you ask with people that do this like regularly, the people that like program more consistently are gonna have a better idea of like, okay, we just have to scale this down depending on like where the athlete is at, not necessarily just from like a training from a age perspective, but also like a physical development, throwing history perspective. And then you do that appropriately, and they're going to be like a perfectly safe tool, no more dangerous than throwing a 5 ounce is going to be.
Right. Like people forget a 5 ounce baseball is still a weight of baseball.
Everyone that has gotten hurt throwing got hurt throwing a 5 ounce.
Yes. Right. Yeah, exactly. So with that, then, like, do you feel like pitching development and throwing development in the past like 10, 15, 20 years is like one that much better? Like going in the right direction because back then, like when you played, like you had shoulder surgeries, and now the shoulder injury is almost like non-existent. Like it's all elbow now. It's all Tommy John on the elbow. Like, what do you think is like the path forward? Is it a lot better than what it was? And like, what's your take on stopping the Tommy John?
I do think throwing development is like way better. I was actually a college roommate of mine actually sent me like just texted me in our college roommate text thread today. Was like, it's like, Terry, you see this kid from like my hometown that's like he's sophomore, he's throwing 101 miles an hour. It's just like, no, it's not striker pants. So that was my first like question was like, oh, is it striker pants? And no, it's not. It's like there's just another 16-year-old that's just throwing 101 miles an hour, and it's just like this isn't just like, and I'm sure there's others that we don't even know about too.
Yeah, right.
And it's just like, the kid's name is Cole Kuhn, so I think his name. But shout out to Cole Kuhn that you're now on this podcast. And like before today, neither of us ever heard of you. So, but that's sick. But like, you just can't look at like the lower levels and just see these absurd things and just be like, you know what, we're worse at like teaching people to throw now. you know, right. I've talked about this like patience before. It's like I'm trying to think about the best way worse. But like in the past, it's like the people that make it to the next level are just like typically the freaks and they can just do whatever. And they haven't had to like quote unquote train well. But now it's like because the training's like so more widely regarded, you're getting like the freak athletes that are doing this, and this is why you get like Paul Skeens, who's just like, he's just like he's just a monster that like has also been like training with like quote unquote new age things. I'm not saying like I'm not gonna like argue new schools versus old school or anything like that, but like I think we can probably make an agreement that like the development of pitching is improving. Do we have it 100% dialed in? Like, no, absolutely not. And I think like the injury, we'll call it epidemic still, is still evidence of that we still don't have it dialed in. But a point that I make is, and actually I've had, multiple conversations with like people working at MLB organizations of like, I think what a large gap is like the gap between where pitching development is and where medical is and rehab is. For numerous reasons, which we could talk about for a long period of time. But I just think we predominantly are still just very much stuck in 2002 when I had my shoulder surgery. And I think especially at the higher levels, the people that are like calling those shots as to like how you rehab people appropriately are still like stuck in that 2002 mindset of like, and for lack of a better term, it's just like pitchers are fragile. We gotta like conserve them. We gotta save their bullets. No like real concept of like if we stress the body appropriately, it will adapt and get stronger.
Adapt or die.
Yeah, and then it'll be less likely to get injured. Is it by any means gonna make anyone bulletproof? No, but I think we have a strong enough like point of evidence now that like what we're doing isn't the best way of like keeping pitchers healthy.
The development and stuff still being like back in 2002 to an extent, like what do you think is like something that we can do to change that, like get actually moving forward here in 2026, but then also like something that is super overhyped that isn't really all that big of a deal?
Again, you might have to keep me on track here.
Okay.
But I think primary thing that we can do is just make sure we're there's collaboration, on the skill side, whether that be like throwing, hitting, with lifting, and then with like medical too. Going back to, when with the handful of teams that I've talked to about the difficulties they're having, it just sounds like things are just like in their silos, where, skill wants to do one thing, but they're, having like minimal communication with medical. Medical is kind of like ends up being the gatekeepers in a lot of these instances. So then, there's not as much, and then there's not enough communication with high performance or strength conditioning. And then their hands get tied with like how much they can try to push an athlete. So I think there needs to be, things need to be, again, just more of a collaborative effort. Medical has to have a more solid understanding than what I think they traditionally do of strength and conditioning principles. I think similar, and same thing with like throwing and hitting too. You don't need to be a throwing or hitting coach. You don't need to be a strength coach, but you gotta have a better understanding of what those principles are than what I think you typically see, at the higher levels, and even just like in our medical, our society as a whole too. And what was the second part of the question too? Sorry.
Basically, like what's like a thing that's super overhyped that like doesn't really need to be that focused on.
I think the probably thing that I would say is the most overhyped is probably just like, maybe not as much anymore, but probably, I don't think I have like the best pulse on it, but I just think like the implementation of systems, as far as like,
Think it's overhyped?
I think it's, well, when I say systems, I mean like medical, like practitioner systems, as far
Okay.
as like,
Okay.
like, most, try going back like 5-6 years, like, oh, we're going to implement like FMS, like we're going to bring in like our PRI guy, we're going to bring in our RPR guy, and then we're just going to just teach it to everyone. And like, I'm not saying there's no value for any of those systems. I just think that like we're getting, you have to get down to like a lot of things that are going to help drive improvement are just going to be time, proper loading, and like the belief that like it's working for them. And when you're trying to force feed your athletes into like one system, that's gonna, a lot of times those systems not providing the amount of loading that they need, to the amount of buy-in that they're going to get is probably also going to be lower, just because they're like, okay, we're going to do this again. So I think you just need to have, like, there's nothing wrong with like having practitioners that perform those symptoms and use them as like a tool in the tool belt. But again, force feed it into like everyone has to do this, we have to utilize this across the board, I think is where you get like the, is overhyped.
Okay. So what do coaches and trainers then need to do to basically get on the same page? Because like when I talk with teams, like some of them are basically like, yeah, we communicate via like a text message, and I'm like a group message, and like no, like an individual text message with like one guy, and they just hope that he like relays the message down the chain, and like kind of to your point with the I guess the lack of implementation of systems in terms of everything being in one place. So like the one thing that was nice about Driveline was like everything was in one house. Like you had clear communication in terms of like what was going on. Pitching and strength was on the same page. Hitting and strength the same page. Like some teams are just like, yeah, we're flying by the seam of our pants. When it comes to like what somebody's doing for throwing and then what he's doing for strength and what he's doing for rehab, like those are all different individual entities which should be operating under the same roof, but it's not. So like, what do you think they should do to get on the same page, and like how does that play out?
Yeah, I think we kind of hit it on the head. And again, going back when I say systems, I was going back to the medical, but this would be a different type of system we talk about. It's like you have a system in place, like that's like essentially like an order of operations for like to put all parts of like the organization together to come together to achieve an outcome. And again, I think like, by no means do I think like this was the exact way it has to be done at Driveline, but you know, we would have an athlete that they would see me, and then I would just have at the end of the day like ongoing communication with strength, with skill, and be like, okay, this is where this athlete's at. This is what I think needs to happen. Can you make this modification? This is one thing, how long of a timeline, but it was like just daily. And then even then, we would also still have like in-person meetings with some regularity too, like just getting more into the weeds, just to make sure there's nothing missed. Uh, and then also, but two, and this was also easier just by nature of the of the setting, was like I was literally 50 feet from 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 the trainers.
Right.
I could actually just watch the guys throwing, which again at like an organization level, at like you're at a school, might not always be the case. So trying to find some ways of like consistent communication, recognize obviously everyone's like super busy and that's hard, but just finding something where it's not like just a game of like telephone, where an athlete, it's like you're communicating to the athlete, then they have to communicate to their coach. It's like, okay, what can we implement, even something as basic as a Slack channel, where it's just like consistent, like up to date, like this is where we're at with things, because this stuff changes like daily, where like an athlete could be feeling great with his rehab one day, and then all of a sudden he has a throwing session, we just pushed a little too much and he's set back. Everyone involved needs to know that like ASAP. You can't find, as a PT, I can't assume my athlete who's going through a throwing program is doing great, but then find out 3 days later that he had a blow up, and then I don't make any modifications to what I think I need him to do. So it's just like implementing like those types of systems where it's just like, okay, what's how can we get everything, communication as like precise and quick as possible and consistent, so again there's just no like drops with it.
I think it's funny that we sit here and talk about like communication, because I think it's something that always gets like overly talked about, in the sense of that's something that when you go in like a corporate meeting, or when you go into like a company meeting, and they're like, all right, like first things first, have to have clear communication. And then like it always ends up breaking down when it comes to like, all right, guys, like something didn't get relayed properly, and as a result, we had this major blow up. And I think that happens at like every single level, like high school to college to pro, and then even in like regular workforces too. Um, and I don't think like the importance of like clear communication can be like stated enough when it comes to that. Because like you and me are talking about right now, like this happens at the highest levels of the game, and it happens in pretty much every other facet of life. So I don't know, like, is there an answer for that? Is there an answer to like fully like push the communication gap?
I don't know. I mean, I give you an example where like we don't. So I won't say names. But again, we had at Drive On, we had an athlete that was like he was high profile, and we were January, like not too far from spring training, and he was kind of coming off of he had like a little bit of like a shoulder issue that was kind of like really impeding progress, and it was super super important that he was gonna be ready for spring training.
Hitter or pitcher?
Pitcher, uh, super super important, and this was like where it's like, okay, we need to double down, and like I had me and like his skill coaches, and then like the strength coach that was like working with him specifically, we literally met like the three of us every single day, and then just be like, just not like just eliminate like typing, eliminate things lost in translation with like electronic communication, and be like, this is the plan for today, this is what happened, this is the plan for tomorrow. We were extremely extremely stressed out about it. Because we were joking like, we were joking like, okay, well, what job are you guys gonna get after this? But again, that's what it's like. We just doubled down and just like, okay, we can't miss a thing in this instance. So it's just like, yeah, it's like when it's as maybe as cliche as it may sound, like, oh, communicate. When the pressure rises, we'll say, like, just go to like your principles of like what's working, and then just like lean in them even more is what I would argue.
How valuable is it to have an athlete who's like super on that type of stuff, rather than an athlete that just kind of like flows by the seam of their pants, and it's like, whatever, like whatever
Man,
coach is
as
telling me.
as I love the setting that we're at right now. But there's definitely some frustration that I get of like trying to get constant communication or like feedback from like my high school athletes, some of my college guys, where
I try to give him some autonomy, and I just, I don't have the ability to like text him every single day. I try to keep up with him every couple of days, but it's like, dude, you should have given me like you need to let me know this. Like 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 a little bit more on like the back, like afterwards, like how you feel. That didn't go well. I need to know like again before like 3-4 days pass. Again, I try to stay on top of it as much as I can, but like it is difficult to like when and again, I'm not like ragging on like all high school athletes by any means, but there definitely is like it is more helpful when it's like you got an athlete who again doesn't need to tell me every single detail of every single thing that happens, but just like giving me the constant feedback of, hey, I did this for throwing today. This is where my velocity was at. Things are feeling great, feeling confident. Like, okay, cool. Or hey, I'm not. I'm feeling a little more tired, a little more beat up today. Velo was down a little bit. What are your thoughts going forward? Like that's, that is extremely helpful. And now, that kind of like streamlines the process. So again, we don't have these, these delays of like making progressions. And it's like just make an adjustment that is an adjustment for like 1 to 2 sessions as opposed to ends up being like an adjustment for like a week or two.
Okay. Is there something you'd like to see kind of implemented into like physical therapy or just like rehab in general when it comes to like training modalities or anything that you think is super valuable but kind of underrated?
Like I said, I think the younger population now is like definitely more like in tune and more on board with like principles of strength conditioning. So I just want to see that continue to move forward. Specifically for baseball, I would like to see just like a better idea of like the level of nuance that needs to go into the various facets as far as like their throwing schedule, as far as their lifting schedule, what they are doing from like a training perspective, as a whole. Because it's so easy to be like, oh, this athlete's lifting and he's throwing like 2 bullpens a week. So that seemed like if you just told a coach or a PT or trainer that, and like they're having arm pain, they're like, okay, well that sounds like that's in check. Okay, we'll just let's go look at their mechanics or let's look at like their scapular movement. But like that, like the details of like the lifting, the details of his throwing schedule, like is he blowing out his recovery days? Is he blowing out his moderate days? Like how many high intent days is he actually throwing? How many low intent days is he throwing? Is he throwing 3 times a week? Is he throwing 6 times a week? Is he lifting 2 to 3 times a week, or is he, as you and I both know, is he lifting 5-6 times a week? Like that's the details that matter, and that's the stuff that like feeds into the injuries. It's not like their scapular or their core control. It's not their throwing mechanics. It's like the stuff of like in their schedule and how they're handling their training is like where like the injuries and the lack of performance happen. So from a baseball perspective, like that's more I want to see like that stuff start getting like more awareness, as opposed to having like a kid come in and see a PT or whomever, and then they just get asked surface level knowledge questions on their routine, and then all of a sudden they just go down an avenue that just isn't like what is best suited for the athlete. Because I mean, also, but at the end of the day, that will still work for that athlete in the short term. But now it's like, now you just like, again, I'm extrapolating here, but now you get like an athlete. It's like, oh, I got hurt because I did, my rotator cuff doesn't fire, my scap control is bad, or I have poor mobility, or my mechanics are bad. And it's like, maybe that's a contributing factor mildly, but like that's just a tip of the iceberg comparison to like everything else I just talked about. And now that athlete is like thinking, has probably more of like a fragility mindset related to his body, because we identified quote unquote things that were wrong with him, as opposed to like giving him the tools to like optimize his schedule.
So do you think the young athletes do too much or too little when it comes to focusing on baseball?
I think that's a hard question to answer. I think older athletes start doing too much. Older athletes, I'm saying high school, like late high school. That's like, if I'm going to generalize, like 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th, that's when you start seeing the kids that are like on the push-pull leg split while trying to throw high intensity 3 days a week.
In gym class. Lifting.
Yeah, like they're lifting in gym class, and then and then lifting at home, and then trying to get quote unquote shredded while also trying to,
Eat 1,200 calories.
trying to understand why they can't throw higher than 70 miles an hour. At the younger level, it's hard because I think just at the younger level, you shouldn't have to focus so much on your sport. But we've set up youth sports that you have to. Like I don't like that I have to like talk to like my 13-year-olds about like their protein intake.
Yeah, right.
Like yes, it's important. But I don't, and I think, and then 13, you can already make cases like it's more okay. But I just don't want to like start. I don't want to do things that takes away from them being a kid, but also recognizing like they're in a society, like we're just in a state where it's like you play 100 games, like we're your youth is kind of being taken is being taken away anyway. So it's like I gotta lean into this. It's like, okay, so we're gonna talk about your eating habits, we're gonna talk about your sleeping habits, like. You gotta talk about like your stress management. So from that regard, like relative to like what's actually being asked of them from like a sporting perspective, like I don't think kids are doing enough. But I don't think the answer necessarily is to like tell them that they need to do more. If that makes sense. It's just try to like find where can we, where like what's being asked of them, where can we kind of give some wiggle room and just like. Improve things a little bit but again without like putting them over the edge of like make it more seem like it's like a full-time job for them.
Kind of wrapping up here. I try to ask each guest on the podcast this. One, give me your top 3 athletes of all time.
That's a good question. Probably have to go with Serena Williams. She was extremely dominant for a very, very, very long period of time.
Yep.
Probably would also have to go with Tiger Woods on account of like literally like changed golf. Like just like people just understand like how different golf is now on account of like Tiger Woods. And then I'll probably honestly go like Shohei.
Yep.
Like I had a longish beer league softball career. And I had a few games where I hit like 2 home runs, and I was like, I am the man. Like, like, from hitting 2 home runs in like beer league softball, and then let alone like just like in the playoff game of like hitting 3 home runs, all like probably the longest home runs like that pitcher has given up in their career, and then also throwing like 7 innings scoreless, like that is just so like absurd. That like someone is capable of doing that at that level. Like I don't think we appreciate what he does.
Agreed. Yeah, like to your point about Tiger Woods too. Like I hate golf. Like, which probably people are gonna get mad about. But
I play golf and I hate it too. So yeah.
Like I don't know how people watch it. Like I watch Tiger Woods, or at least like when he was like good. But like he's the man. And then last question here too. And this might be different with like physical therapy, but do you have any like crazy outlandish stories coming up like in the physical therapy realm, like any crazy athlete stories, anything that like was super ostentatious that you have to like share because it's hilarious?
Probably like two stories that's like, I mean, it's just like more like cool stories and also just like very funny. One was when Tim Lincecum came in a Driveline.
Yep.
And I was gonna, like I worked with every athlete that came in there, so it's not like I'm violating HIPAA or anything like that. But like I was about to work with like Tim, and I did work with Tim, and like he had just gotten done working out, so he was like super super sweaty, and then like I was wrapping up with him, and then I had like this college kid come in and like was like lined up afterwards, and then like I was like, okay, just give me a second to lay down the table real quick. He's like, I'll lay down Tim Lincecum sweat. I'm like, you are not doing that, dude. and then there was also a joke at the Driveline. Just there was like, if you like paid enough attention, there was just always like a lot of like surreal shit happening. Just as far as like just moments of like what like where we how's this a job that we're doing right now? Probably like the most surreal moment was working with Shohei, and I'm like standing there, he's like doing an exercise, and then like we just have WAP blasting, like just absolutely. It was played so loud. Like, it was like if it was like if like a parent walked in, like I like we've just like we gotta turn this down.
Yeah.
But it's just like absolutely, the Cardi B making these songs. It's just absolutely blasting. And like I have one of the best athletes in like the history of sports, just like at my table doing an exercise, and this song is just absolutely blasting. I'm just like, what is my job right now? Like, how have I gone from being like getting discussions at like in PT school about like ethics, and then I just have like one of the most like raunchy songs playing while like with one of the like the most unique unicorn athlete of all time.
That's funny. That's crazy that happened too, because like this summer when I worked there, it was like super strict about what was played like over the radio. I think we had some instances happen before me that basically
Shohei complained about WAP
maybe
plays.
yeah right. But yeah, I remember like any word that got said over it was like somebody go change their speaker right now because we're gonna get yelled at. But yeah, that's funny. Cool. Okay. Well, awesome. Well, thank you very much for coming on. To the viewers, thank you very much for watching. This is week 2, so hopefully come back next week. We'll have another one for you, and every Friday after that.
Take care, guys.